Managing a team of investigators just got easier with TrackOps, the all-in-one case management software. Are you ready to enhance case flows and drive efficiency? TrackOps offers powerful management and coordination tools to streamline workflows and communication, all designed to keep your team synchronized and focused on the task at hand. With TrackOps, you can easily distribute workloads, track individual performance, and ensure deadlines are met. Plus, the TrackOps mobile app allows investigators to access case activities on the go. And the TrackOps video app allows for simple and consistent timestamping, all included at no extra cost. Start streamlining your investigation process today. Visit trackops.com for a free 15-day trial and experience the power of efficient team management. TrackOps, empowering teams, simplifying management. The Campbell Group has teamed up with PI Perspectives to offer listeners top-notch, affordable insurance solutions. Private investigators can get insurance for their business for as low as $305 per year. Apply now at piperspectivesinsurance.com and receive a quote back within 24 hours. Do you enjoy our podcast and the guests we bring you? Since 2019, Matt and his team have done their very best to give you amazing shows each week. If you feel like our show has helped you to be a better investigator, or maybe even inspired you to become an investigator, please let us know. We're looking for testimonials. Drop Matt an email with a recorded 20 to 30 seconds of you talking about this podcast. You can also email him something verbal about the website. His email is matthew.s@satellitepi.com. And if you really feel blessed for having this content, consider supporting Matt and our show by joining Investigators Toolbox. You really have to see version 2.0. And at just 49 cents a day, it's a no-brainer. Now let's jump in to this week's episode. We are back with a new show this week. Today we welcome Conflict International's John Rowan. John recently retired from New York Suffolk County Police Department as Chief of Detectives. John has a passion for a new type of investigative technique called Genetic Genealogy research. The guys discuss how this technology and others impact investigations. So let's welcome John Rowan and your host, private investigator Matt Spaier.
And welcome everybody to this week's episode of PI Perspectives. This is Matt Spaier, your host. We've got a really interesting topic to talk about today with a really interesting guy, somebody who we've actually become friends over the last year or so. And we met by chance at an event out in Long Island. And I'm really, really excited to welcome John Rowan to the program. John, how are you?
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So for folks who don't know who you are and what your background is, give me a little bit of your background and how you got to where you are now.
Okay. Well, I'll start with the biggest part of my life was spent with the Suffolk County Police Department. I did nearly 31 years with them. I retired in January of this year, and I was the chief of detectives when I retired. During my career, I held a number of positions. 20 of my 31 years was in a supervisory role. I was commanding officer of the 3rd Precinct, which is one of the busier precincts in the county. I had approximately 250 sworn officers in my command, 53 square miles, and about 350,000 residents, which I was responsible for.
Right.
Prior to that, I was this commanding officer of the Major Crimes Bureau in the Detective Division, and I oversaw the Homicide Unit, Major Case Squad, Special Victims, and hate crimes. During that time, we were experiencing a tremendous amount, over 17 murders related to the transnational criminal organization MS-13. And one of my primary duties during that time was to liaison with the federal and state partners. And we were very, very successful in doing federal prosecutions on multiple members of that gang. And I was fortunate enough in 2018 to travel to El Salvador in what became an intelligence sharing mission with the El Salvadorian National Police as well as the FBI. in El Salvador.
Wow.
Um, yeah, it was quite an interesting experience, and uh, ironically, or coincidentally, I should say, the director of the National Police in El Salvador was a fellow FBI National Academy graduate. I did not
Wow.
know him, but we shared that commonality, and it was interesting to meet with him and speak with him about that, our shared experiences, although it was at different times.
Right.
Additionally, in my career, I was a captain in the Internal Affairs Bureau, where I oversaw officer-involved shooting teams. I was the primary lead for the federal agencies that we dealt with, primarily the FBI. It
Right.
was a short stint in my career, but a necessary one. And then I had some other investigative commands, including the First Squad Detectives, which I'm very proud to have been associated with, as well as the Sixth Precinct Crime Section.
Right. And before you wrapped up your career with Suffolk County, and that's Suffolk County, New York, by the way, for those who aren't sure,
Sorry.
Long Island, New York.
Yeah.
Um, before you retired with an amazing career, some things happened out there. Uh, there was some news coming out of Suffolk County, which involved an architect from New York City. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's been all over the news. An outstanding job by the investigators assigned to the Gilgo Beach Task Force. And in July of 2023, we arrested Rex Huerman, and he was charged with three murders initially. He's subsequently been charged with additional murders, and these were all related to bodies and remains that were found along the Gilgo Beach corridor on the South Shore of Long Island in 2010 to 2012.
Sure.
And I'm very proud to have been associated with it. My role was executive oversight of the detectives from the Suffolk County Police Department that were assigned to the task force. The other members of the task force were the New York State Police, the Suffolk County Sheriff's Office, and the District Attorney's Office, as well as the Suffolk County Crime Lab personnel.
Sure.
Um, that case is still proceeding through the courts, so I'm not at really liberty to discuss it at this time, maybe
Yep.
sometime down the road, but I just will say that I'm very proud to have been affiliated with it, and it was an absolutely, and continues to be, an
Yeah.
outstanding investigation, which I believe will go down as one of the best serial killer investigations, um, probably in modern history with police departments.
Right. Yeah. Well, this is not a true crime podcast, so you're safe. We're
Okay,
not
good,
we're
good.
not
Yep,
talking about all that stuff. So we'll save
yeah.
that for some other guy's show at some other time.
All right.
I did want to mention it though. And
Yeah.
obviously we're not going to get into the specifics of that case, but you know, our topic today, what we're talking about, we'll discuss not necessarily that case, but different aspects of technology and trends, and the emerging trends in investigations, and having such a distinguished career that you had, um, you got to see some things change, and some tools that were not available, or were, we watched it on TV and said, wow, that'd be cool if we could do that one day. Now has become reality, which is pretty neat. So really great to be able to use this new technology, new things, right?
Yeah. So, Matt, I've always been a fan of technology, and I always like to see how, whether it's in our work lives or in our personal lives, how we can do things more efficiently.
Mhm.
And going back to a time when I was a sergeant and I got drafted to come up to the chief of patrol's office, myself and another sergeant who is now a high-ranking member of the police department, still working, were tasked with coming up with the first online version of reporting for the police officers in the field. And
Right.
we were able to work with our IT section and develop that. We were recognized with a department award for that. Um, that has since been several iterations of it, and including major improvements over the years. But that was my first real um, foray into technology and policing. And from
Yep.
there, it just continued. And I saw the benefit of it. And it's something that I was always an advocate for.
Yeah. Oh, great. I mean, my first impression of you when I met you, and that was at an ASIS event out in Long Island. We were talking about, or your topic that night was talking about some of the technology and implementing things. I mean, for me, just the fact that I'm looking at a car accident report that's not handwritten is like a game changer for me because some of these guys have really terrible handwriting,
I
and
was
just
one of
being
those
able to
guys,
read
so
something.
I can't be too critical. Despite my Catholic school
Yeah.
upbringing, my handwriting is not exactly the best.
Yeah, me too. I actually was left-handed, and in first grade, my teachers made me switch to my right hand.
Okay.
So I used to be able to write just as sloppy with my left hand as my right hand, and now I'd say thank God for keyboards, because
Exactly. And the
yeah,
other thing I'd like to mention, Matt, is I had the opportunity to go back to graduate school at St. John's University when I was working as a lieutenant, and I took advantage of that. I got to meet a lot of individuals in the criminal justice community that were really on the cutting edge of some technology that was going on at that time, and real forward thinkers. As well as in 2009, I was fortunate enough to attend the FBI National Academy
right,
in Quantico, Virginia. And that's a 10-week executive management program that less than 1% of the law enforcement officials worldwide attend. And I'm very proud to have gone to that. And I've developed relationships with police chiefs from around the world through that organization. And I'm currently still heavily involved, even after 15 years of going there, that I'm the first vice president of the New York State Eastern Canada chapter of the
sure.
FBI National Academy Associates.
I guess once you're in the club and they teach you the handshake, you kind of have to stay, even when you're done, right?
Yeah, well, you know what it is? We hit a yellow brick. There's a an obstacle course thing that's called the Yellow Brick Road, and if you have the yellow brick, you're in the club. If you know, you know,
Awesome.
that type of
That's
thing.
awesome.
Yeah,
That's great. And if you want to leave the club, they just hit you over the head with the yellow brick
yeah,
until you ain't going
yeah.
anywhere.
They take it back, I think. So yeah,
You get an
yeah,
indentation of a yellow brick in your head. There you go.
exactly,
Um,
exactly.
I mean, that's cool. I mean, listen, the opportunities, of your career, it's impressive. And, being part of these like think tanks and these, uh, having the ability to have a discussion and change policy, is awesome, right? Being able to have a voice and really have these discussion points. I mean, that as a somebody who does this type of work, I mean that's like living the dream, right? Wouldn't it
Mhm.
be cool if we could do this? Wouldn't it be better? I'm out there doing my job, and I feel it could be better if it was done this way. Having that arena to actually have that discussion. I mean, it's special. It could be intimidating as well, too. I'm sure some of the other people that you've been in that group with, you're just like, wow, how to get here, right?
Yeah, I mean, it can be intimidating. But I was always and I still operate under the guise that I don't need to be the smartest person in the room, right? I can always be the person that maybe has to guide the conversation or drive us in a certain direction, but I don't need to be the person that has to have all the answers.
Yeah,
And even when I came up and spoke to the Albanese folks who, room full of professional investigators that had some had a lot more experience than I do.
sure.
I made it clear that hey, there may be people in this room that have a better grasp on some of the topics that we were going to discuss, and I certainly uh, would reach out to them and say, hey, what can I learn from you? I'm always looking to learn. I think that's important.
No, that's a good mark of a good leader, good business owner, someone who's successful at managing people. And that's something like off the bat, from the second that I met you, John, I was like, okay, this is a people manager. He's a motivator, and he's somebody who knows how to, you know, get tasks done, to, give out assignments and then take the input back. I think when we were sitting down and talking with some of the detectives that were working under you at the time, just seeing the respect that you had for them and they had for you, it was impressive, man. And that's like part of, a strategy of work, whether it's owning a business or being part of a business and managing people, like you need to learn those skills, right?
And having 20 plus years in a supervisory role out of my 31-year career
Yeah.
definitely helps. You don't get it right every time. I mean, we could probably be doing an entire podcast on stuff that I got as a leader or a manager. But overall, I made conscious efforts to, make the right decisions at the right time and
Yeah.
let the people do the job when it needs to be done. I was always one of the guys that say, hey, we got to keep our foot on the gas, but
Yeah.
we also need to know when to pump the brakes. So,
And keep your eyes on the mirrors, you know?
yeah, absolutely.
You can do that stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So,
Yeah. Yeah. It's like I always love to quote, one of my favorite PI friends from New Jersey, Jim Nanos. It's always better to know the guy or girl than be the guy or girl.
yeah.
And I think it's such a good ruby of wisdom, that you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You don't have to be the most successful person in the room, but you need to know how to listen, and you need to know how to count on the different resources that you have at your disposal, and know how to use them and know when to activate them at the right time. Which leads us to talking about this emerging trends of investigations, forensic genetic genealogy, which is a mouthful. I'm dreading doing the show notes for this on having to spell all that, uh, but I am excited to talk about all that stuff. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a quick break, and when we come back, we're gonna dive into all that stuff, the emerging trends, and talk about genealogy, and how that has changed in the past few years as far as like investigative techniques. So everybody sit tight, and we will be right back.
After 4 years of development, Scope Now is proud to announce the release of Grid. Grid combines OSINT with real-time physical data to achieve new levels of intelligence gathering. Grid supports over 50 data types and hundreds of thousands of sources. Upgrade your OSINT capabilities with Grid and elevate your intelligence team today at scopenow.com. Check out the PI Institute of Education at piinstitute.com. Since 1989, Kelly Riddle has been teaching on subjects such as surveillance, nursing home investigations, insurance fraud, domestic investigations, hidden assets, and accident scene investigations. The PI Institute of Education is a featured learning partner in the investigatorstoolbox.com. So check out the free content on the site, then visit the Institute for more great savings on additional classes. Are you drowning in fees with your current provider? IRB Search offers the highest quality data at the most competitive prices. Founded by investigators for investigators, IRB is tailored specifically toward helping you close your cases. We're currently offering PI Perspective listeners an exclusive 30-day free trial of our system. So simply go to irbsearch.com and apply using the promo code PIP30 to claim this promotion. Satellite Investigations has launched its new website full of great new content. Matt and his team have released some great, informative blogs. Make sure you log into LinkedIn and follow Satellite Investigations for the latest content.
And welcome back to PI Perspectives. This is Matt Spaier, your host. Today we're joined by John Rowan. John is actually working with Conflict International, which is one of his post-law enforcement newest place of business. And I'm excited to work with him because I do some work with Conflict as well. And John, I want to welcome you back to the program.
Thanks, Matt. And very happy to be joining Conflict International. I think it's a lot of opportunity. I'm looking forward to working with you and the team. And I think it's going to be a good thing.
It's great. Yeah, no, definitely. I'm looking forward to doing more and more with you. But today we're talking about emerging trends of investigation, specifically forensic genetic genealogy. Again, a mouthful, but some interesting stuff. So tell me a little bit about what that is.
So if I could back up a second and I'll start from the beginning. I originally got plugged into forensic investigative genetic genealogy, which the acronym is FIG, F-I-G-G, while I was chief of detectives. We had a number of cold case uh, homicides, sex assaults that we had DNA, but there was no hit in CODIS, which is the combined DNA index system, the national one. So there was some discussion about, well, what other routes are out there that can be taken. And I learned about this forensic investigative genetic genealogy, and it was something that was explored and something that I really became uh, enamored by, and I saw the value in it. And basically, what it is, Matt, is if I could, it's essentially taking the DNA, getting a sample of the DNA, and they take a profile which is called a SNP, SNP. For ease, I won't give you the entire term, which that means, but SNP. It's loaded up into GEDmatch Pro, which is basically a combined database from things like 23andMe, those type of consumer DNA databases. And it that DNA profile of either your unidentified human remains or perhaps even a suspect is compared against the data in the databases of GEDmatch Pro. And based on different markers in that DNA sample, they can determine if one, obviously, it's easy if the person is in that database, but if they're
Right.
not, they can actually build out to third and fourth degrees of separation, or perhaps more, of relative that's in there. And then a genealogist goes back and builds essentially a family tree to try to determine who could possibly have provided this sample.
Amazing.
And it came to the forefront in 2018 with the Golden State Killer case, and the in California. And they were able to identify a former police officer by the name of Joseph D'Angelo, who was a suspect in crimes ranging from burglary, rapes, and 13 murders that occurred in the 1970s and 80s. And basically, in GEDmatch, they were able to take some of the suspect DNA, determine it was a relative of a person in there, build out the family tree, and they narrowed it down to D'Angelo. That's the real brief version of it, but
Sure.
essentially that's how they came to get it. That brought genetic genealogy to the forefront, at least as criminal investigations go. And I subsequently learned about it, as well as colleagues of mine, and we said this is something that we need to explore.
Sure. Yeah, it's pretty amazing how
So
you think that your sister, your mother, whatever, your cousin, hey, I'm gonna go do this 23andMe. I'd like to see where I'm
yes,
from originally. It's like
right.
you're voluntarily just giving away markers, essentially, right?
Yes, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's interesting because there's two components of it. You would get the DNA sample from a crime scene, you load it up into there, you develop this SNP profile as opposed to an STR. Think of it's like one's a one-to-one analysis, one is a one-to-many analysis. And through the one-to-many analysis, you then determine, okay, these are possible relatives of our person. And then you have to build build a family tree, figure out,
Yeah.
okay, how many times removed is this person from our actual suspect or unidentified human remains? And
Yeah.
it's amazing. And it has so many applications, and it does take expertise. It does take a lot of patience to do, but I think the rewards and the benefits are there for law enforcement as well as the public, and the victims' families, and even missing persons who remains are found and we don't know who they are. So I think it's quite interesting.
Yeah, and when you start talking about trends and as technology like this starts to become available, it then needs to get challenged, right? So
Yes.
you have your expert witnesses that are going to start challenging this stuff as to the validity of it, and I'm sure there's going to be some motion practice. There'll be some decisions, and there'll be case memos, and the ball will keep rolling till this
Yes.
is accepted practice, right? Um, which
Right.
is
So
pretty neat,
yeah, so along those lines, Matt, I was fortunate enough to be asked to join a what's termed a task force, and it's run by the Integrated Justice Information Systems, which is a DOJ funded not-for-profit located in DC. And they look at different emerging issues, trends, hot topics in the criminal justice world. For example, there was a task force on facial recognition, and they
Mm,
produced white papers, um, best practices, standards, and that task force is ongoing. The task force that I'm involved in is on forensic investigative genetic genealogy, and we're composed of law enforcement, prosecutors, folks from labs, and other folks from the private sector. And we're going to do the same thing with genetic genealogy. We're going to look at what are the best practices, what are the standards, what needs to be done to make sure, what are the investigative steps that need to be done, you know.
right.
And I think at the end, this just started, we're only in about month 3 of this task force. um, I think at the end, we're going to have a product that's very similar to what they produced for facial recognition, that a law enforcement agency can use, whether it's at the federal, state, or local level, to
Right.
say, hey, this is what we should be looking for. These are some of the pitfalls. These are some of the um, problems we should anticipate. And
Sure.
the fact that we have a myriad of task force members from different disciplines is what I think is where our strength is.
Yeah, it's neat. It's really just incredible to be a part of that and just see where it's all coming and going. And
Yeah,
having the input into saying that is amazing. And
yeah,
it's same thing had to be done, with other different technology that now is accepted practice. I'm sure you have tons of forensics, the type of testing fingerprints, how things are recovered, testing of certain things. I'm sure have all gone through that particular process.
yeah. I mean, even the testing of ballistics, that is changing
Great example.
constantly. I mean, I know, whereas we would have a shooting, whether it was someone shot or whether it was someone just shots fired somewhere, and we'd have to get the ballistics over to the lab. The lab would then do their work, and then we would get a report back, and hopefully there would be some sort of connection made to a previous shooting, and we could work backwards and try to make connections.
Right.
Now they have um, these ballistics machines that can test them almost immediately and make these connections. And
Right.
it's quite interesting because it changes the game. It makes the decision making process for someone that sat in, like my role as chief of detectives,
Right.
very quick, very rapid decision making. And the benefit of that to the public is that we can make connections to certain crimes and certain individuals, and then position our resources to hopefully prevent the next one,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So all this technology is, to me, the most important thing about it is that it enhances decision-making capabilities. And not
Yeah.
only at the chief level, like I was sitting at, but even for the officer on the street,
Yeah,
right?
that's a great
I
point.
mean,
Yeah.
where they can make these connections. And in the private sector, let's face it, if you can make connections across your caseload or your case management system
Mhm.
of a particular client or a particular complaint or a particular location,
Yeah.
it just feeds your decision making process and makes it that much easier, quicker, and more efficient.
Yeah, I mean, I think like some of the softwares that you see that are out there, like every year I go to like the osmosis event, and you have
Mhm.
these different vendors here. It's like, oh, we look at this stuff we're doing now, or look at this thing, different emerging trends of types, right? And that's always one of the keys that they try and have this, relational analysis, right? You've got this data point, you've got that data point, you got this data point. How do you put it all together and show that they're pointing in the same direction with things? Our software will do that, right? We'll create that that map for you and doing whatever, right? So you see stuff like that. And I remember like going through and test driving some of this stuff and going, okay, this is scary, but it's kind of neat. And
Yeah,
then you get the price tag of what it would cost to have a subscription for it for the year, and you fall out of your chair and go, okay, I'm
yeah,
not a government agency, I can't afford that.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but as the
Well,
demand comes out, it gets cheaper, right? Because people they get
well, that
competition.
and that's the whole thing. And just switching gears back to genetic genealogy, like there was about a half a dozen or so labs across the country that were actually able to do that SNP profile. That's expanding. I learned recently that one of the first public labs came online in Texas recently. Um, you know, Again, genetic testing is expensive.
Yep.
And that's something a consideration that, needs to be, but as, like you said, as it becomes more commonplace, as standards get put in place, as it becomes tested through the court system, I believe that it'll become more common. The price will be driven down. It'll
Sure.
become more accessible, particularly for the agencies that are not like the NYPD or the Suffolk County Police Department, where you're the top 12 police department in the country, in as far as personnel and budgeting. As
Yeah.
some of the smaller agencies can start to afford that stuff.
I think it's going to be real interesting when you start seeing this type of technology and stuff that takes more along the lines of like civil claims. Whereas
Right.
now I think it's more, criminal and
Mhm.
proving somebody was involved with a particular thing. But there are also aspects to it on the civil side that as it becomes more affordable, like this may be in one of those other things that services that as investigators that you're able to offer, become an expert, get certified. It's like the whole digital phone forensics, right? That was something that was like, oh, well, no, this is not something the everyday person can do. And now, there are many great schools out there, Parabin, et cetera, that you can go and learn how to do all this stuff. And now it's marketable for you. You can say, I'm an expert in doing this. Bug sweeps is another example. Like
Mhm.
used to be, the everyday person couldn't do bug sweeping. But now if you got a bankroll, you can afford the equipment and get trained to do it. It's something that you can do. So it's going to be very interesting to see how all that starts to trickle down into the private sector for sure.
Yeah, I definitely see applications for this stuff in the private sector. And during my speech with Aldenese, I
Mhm.
did mention artificial intelligence, and I was speaking to one of the members at offline about it and how he was using it across his case management system in the private sector, which I found interesting.
Yeah,
So I do think there's going to be applications for all this stuff in the private sector. A lot of times, the test runs, as you know, of new products are done in the public sector because that's usually where the funding is, and there's more data, so to speak, in one place where they can almost run their beta projects through and kind of work out the kinks. And then once they do, all of a sudden somebody says, "Well, we can use this in the private sector."
yeah,
I was recently speaking with an artificial intelligence company located here in the U.S. and a colleague of mine is with them, and we were just discussing the different applications of artificial intelligence in the private sector. So
yeah,
I think it's definitely in there. I think the big thing with technology is, and you mentioned it, is that first off is the cost, right? I mean, especially in the private sector. I mean,
right,
there is always going to be the ongoing costs. There's always going to be upgrades. We talk about our iPhones or whatever cell phone you have. After a time, you got to upgrade it, and you're always going to be upgrading technology. The other thing is, which I think is very important and applies to both the public and the private sector. Just because technology is available and it can do certain things, and let's face it, you said it, there's some scary things that technology can do.
for sure. Yeah,
Um, I think you have to make a determination. Is it legal and is it ethical to use that technology?
yeah,
And when you can answer those questions, I think then you can come to a decision. Is it right for you in
should I
your
be doing
line
it?
of work to use it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I always, Mike LaCourt from Conflict always has
yep.
a great, his ideology on it is great.
Mm,
The way he breaks it down. Is it actionable? Right. And what does that mean? Right. Are we developing information intelligence that's actionable, meaning can it be used in a court of law? Can it
yes.
solve your client's problem? If it can't solve your client's problem, I mean, you can get it, but if it can't solve your client's problem, it's kind of worthless,
Mhm.
right? So
No,
always
absolutely.
keeping in mind that whatever we're developing, whatever resources we're using, must be actionable. Otherwise, we're wasting everybody's time, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. For a period of time, the intelligence unit was underneath the chief of detective's office while I was over there, and I've always been an advocate for that exact thing. Actionable intelligence where you're also proactive on it. And, if it, like you said, and like Mike says, if it's not actionable, then it's fodder. It's nothing. It's useless, right? I mean, we just, we can just disregard it.
Right.
So
I mean, there are ways like, I mean, there is intelligence where that can point you in the right direction to
sure.
find something that's actionable. But at the end of the day, the end result is whatever you're producing needs to be something that can be used by whoever's hiring you to get that information.
Right.
Otherwise,
Right. Right.
that'll be a one and done client. You'll go through
Yes.
budget and hopefully you get paid, but you won't get ever a job with them ever again.
Yeah,
Right.
with them again. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it,
I think also, we spoke about, um, is it legal? Is it ethical? Obviously, those are important.
yeah,
Um, but I think even in the private sector, there you have to have the privacy and data concerns, of you know in the forefront of your mind, right?
yeah,
I mean, how are you going to use this stuff? Are you in a position to access that data, and then,
yeah,
like you said, use it? And if you're not,
yeah.
again, that's where you walk a fine line, and
Yeah.
if it's not, again, it becomes non actionable.
And one of the other issues or things that just to be aware of and understand that could happen is you start talking on the legislative side, right? So you get politicians who want to get reelected or want to get elected, and they start saying like, okay, well, what are pain points for the John Q public, right?
Yeah,
Privacy is a major pain point,
right.
right? So if I can start shaking the tree saying, what do you mean 23andMe is selling data to or giving data to law enforcement? I didn't know, like, they didn't authorize that. I didn't know they were doing that, right? So they start shaking the tree, and now all of a sudden, there's bills that are out there that are preventing that information from being collected, right? So that's another danger too. And if you don't have oversight on that, somebody a lobbyist or whatever that's watching out for these things, going, whoa, 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 we use this for good. Like we need this.
Yeah,
Like it's important for us to collect it. Yes, it's being collected, but it's not like we're going and reselling it to somebody who shouldn't have it, and that kind of things, right? So having something like NCISS, National Council of Investigative Security Services, that watching over, that kind of stuff. I think there's a danger in that too, and a danger in judges not understanding, right?
right.
Danger in politicians not understanding. Like these are all the things that TKO this technology very quickly if they're not educated on it. Also,
No,
right?
100%, 100%. And when you look at the genetic genealogy, there's roughly 40 million people worldwide have taken at least one DNA test.
Yeah.
Right now, GEDmatch has about 2 million samples in it.
Okay.
And if they can get to 3 million, which is roughly 1% of the US population, they say that they can connect over 95% of the US population to a third cousin relation and over 58% to a second cousin relation. Now, there are parameters on whether you opt in or opt out, what your sample can be used for. So
Right.
I don't want to misspeak and lead the listeners to believe that
Sure.
you do a 23andMe and your data is being uploaded and it's being
Right.
used to test. No, it's not. There
Right.
are there are definitely strict guidelines, and it's well regulated.
Oh
If
yeah.
I
Read your
could
pamphlets,
speak
people. When
Yes, exactly.
you get your
Read
test,
the
read
fi- read the fine print. Read
the
the
fine
fine
print.
print, Matt. If I could speak to one thing about, when you said about the politicians, I
Sure.
share a quick story.
Yeah.
Um, when I was the commanding officer of the third precinct, we were having a number of shootings. In the third precinct, the population of 350,000 residents or so ran the myriad from $1 million plus homes on the South Shore of Long Island through upper middle class, and even into some lower income areas. We also had the largest Hispanic population on Long Island, concentrated in Central Islip and Brentwood. We
Mhm.
had two separate mosques, which were some of the biggest in Suffolk County. So we had a real melting pot of different folks.
Sure.
But we were having these series of shootings, and they were concentrated primarily in these three communities. And one of the things that there was a grant that came available to install license plate readers. And that was obtained through a local politician. And we worked with them to pick out different locations for these license plate readers, which essentially were choke points that if a shooting occurred anywhere in the precinct, the likelihood of you driving through one of these locations, we would capture your plate.
Right.
Well, you can imagine the community uproar because they thought that we were going to be using this for anything and
Right.
everything. And
Profiling.
and right, exactly. And it was really a community education program to get out there saying, hey, we're not interested if you're driving without a license or you don't have a license plate in your car. No, we're here to stop violent crime. And that's what this stuff is going to be used for. And eventually it did get smoothed out. But like you said, that's an education part. And
Yeah.
I share that story from the public side, but also from the private side. Not only educating the investigators on what technology is out there and could be useful in an investigation, but again, like you said, educating the judges who might be uh, presiding over a case, whether it be civil or whatnot, and then again the politicians, so that you don't have the backlash from them when they get a phone call from one of their constituents complaining that their privacy was invaded or that they were profiled, like you said, in some way.
Yeah. I many years ago sat in on a continuing education class for the Trial Lawyers Association on privacy in the internet, and it was a panel, and they had three people on the panel who were seasoned.
Mm,
Well, let's just say that they've been around for a while, and they
right.
had a judge on that panel who was very seasoned, and they started discussing the topics of social media research and the ethics behind it. And I'm sitting there going, oh wow, okay, the stuff they're talking about, like they're they're making some errors on what they're saying. um and then their positions on it, like they're talking like they don't know how it actually works. And then they would say like, oh, and I don't really understand how this works, but I know you can do this. And I'm going, uh-oh. Like,
Yeah.
these are the people that are like, they're the experts and they don't
Yes.
really understand it. But I give them credit because they were like, I have like my law clerk is really the one who's on top of this stuff. Like I
Right.
count on them to like read through all this stuff and give the opinions on it. Right. So that's the other thing too. Sometimes you got to have a fresher set of eyes that are taking a look at these things to understand it. But
I mean,
it was
and that goes back to one of my original statements is that I didn't need to be the smartest guy in the room. I had people that
right.
handled the digital forensic stuff that would take me years to get up to
Yeah.
speed on, but I had to trust them. I had to trust the people in the lab. You have to, you have the people around you that can do that stuff. I think you need to have a general understanding and know how it can apply and what ways it can do. But you certainly can't be an expert on everything,
Yeah.
especially with technology, unless you're going to devote yourself full time to it because
And
it's
become the
just
expert. Yeah.
constantly evolving.
Yeah. Know what you can do, not how to do it. Right. That's
Exactly.
that's the
Exactly.
key
No,
there.
exactly. Exactly. Yep.
I think we're
You
gonna put
know,
a bow on it right there. I think that's a good place to stop.
okay.
When it comes to emerging trends and investigations, know what you
Yeah,
can do, not how you can do it, and blend it right
exactly.
there.
Yeah,
So,
that's a good one.
yeah,
So
John, thank you so much for coming on. And
yeah,
again, I'm
appreciate it,
really
Matt.
excited to work with you through conflict. I know we're going to do some great things. How do folks get a hold of you if they have any questions or feedback on this?
So I'm on LinkedIn, John Rowan. You can just check me out on LinkedIn. If not, you can get me on my email is john.rowan at conflictinternational.com. So I think
Perfect.
that's the best way.
Yep.
Um, and I'll just do a shameless plug for my LinkedIn newsletter
Oh,
that I
please
put
do.
out
Yeah, sorry
weekly.
about that. Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's just something I picked up in retirement. It's just a weekly uh, newsletter that I put out, different thoughts, and if you can, if you're, if any of the listeners want to take a look at it, it's really light reading. It takes about 5 minutes, and I try to do something thought provoking, some humorous, some kind
Yeah.
of serious, but just some thought provoking stuff on daily observations and something that it's called the Shorty Club, and
Mhm.
it's the idea is that you would be sitting around drinking a bourbon and maybe smoking a cigar and talking about different things. So,
Awesome.
but I really appreciate this opportunity to come on and speak, and I do look forward to also working with you, Matt, on a consistent and regular basis. And I think we're going to do a lot of good things together.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. Thank you so much. We'll have all that information in the show notes. Excuse me. So yeah, folks can go check it out. Thank you everyone for tuning in, checking out this episode. We'll be back shortly with another episode soon. And sit tight. And thanks again for checking it out. Have a good one.
Thanks for checking out the show. Big thanks to John for coming on. We'd also like to thank Campbell Insurance Group for sponsoring our podcast. Remember to tell them you listen to save $50 when you apply for insurance. Additional thanks goes to IRB, PI Institute for Education, Scope Now, Track Ops, and don't forget about investigatorstoolbox.com, where you can type in Perspectives 50 to save $50 when you join up. Please also follow Matt and Satellite Investigations on LinkedIn. If you have a question or a comment about the show, you can email Matt at matthews@satellitepi.com. You can also find him on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. He's a social media butterfly. We want your feedback to bring you the best shows possible, so chime in anytime you like. We'll be back next week with a new show, so make sure you tune in and stay safe out there.